Okay, great. We're going to get started right now. So I am Joan Cool, author of the just released Dig Your Heels In, Navigate Corporate BS and Build the Company You Deserve. It has been an amazing week, so you'll hear a little bit of the scratchiness in my voice since I've been doing a lot of talking. The book just came out 2 days ago on April 16th, and we had an extraordinary celebration. And it wasn't a celebration just about a book. It was really about the movement and the conversation that I'm trying to trigger and the actions I hope to inspire. So this is really about achieving equality in the workplace, but also in society. So our book launch celebration was both a dialogue about women advancing in the workforce and the barriers that are holding us back, hearing some of the stories from the trailblazers that are featured in the book, along with my own personal journey, but also talking about the critical investment we have to always make in our girls. And not just their leadership, their awareness, their skills, their confidence, their health, all the things that will allow them to absolutely achieve their potential, but also prepare them with their eyes wide open to what the world really, how the world really works right now. And so that they're really prepared to cherish and be proud of their voice, be bold, be smart and strong as they go after everything that they deserve, their goals and their dreams. So today, this is a webinar called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Because this is ultimately one of the biggest triggers I have found in interviewing women through my work over the years, which is whenever we get to a point where we have to navigate a significant career decision, a move, let's say we're considering even a promotion or taking something in a different department or switching fields, or we're finding that we are frustrated where we work today and we can't pinpoint what it is, or maybe we know exactly what it is. And we're looking at the door saying, maybe I can't achieve everything I want here, or I'm just not happy. I think I need to go somewhere else. Or you're experiencing FOMO, fear of missing out, feeling like everybody else is leapfrogging their way to the top and you've just been putting in the time at the same company. It could also be navigating the decision to re-enter the workforce. You left to start a business, have a family, take care of loved ones, family or friends. So there's a lot of reasons why women are navigating this decision. But what I've found in both interviewing and conducting the research myself, but also auditing the amazing research that's already out there, is that we oftentimes are doing it in a vacuum because life is so busy and we don't exactly get the breathing room or even allow ourselves the breathing room to thoroughly think through this decision and all of its factors and work it and talk it through with somebody else. And that's what I'm trying to be for you. I'm trying to be that coach, that partner, that cheerleader for you that gives you some really important things to think about, some questions to reflect on. I'll never make the decision for you, but I hope that this helps you when you ultimately do decide what your next move is, to do so with confidence, with conviction, and not with regret or guilt. Okay, so with that as the foundation of what I want to cover today, how do we break this down? Should I stay or should I go? I think the first thing I want to do is share some really good news with you, which means I'm not actually going to give you bad news at all, but I just really think that this is great news to share. So when I was working on one of the chapters in the book called around wake-up calls, because to me, I would define a wake-up call in work is that moment where just something happens and it triggers usually an emotional response in us. And you're like, something doesn't feel right, or you're frustrated, or, it just gives you that pause. And usually those wake up calls are followed by that big decision. But when you go back and really break it down, it's usually not just that one moment. There was a bunch of things that were building up, and that ultimately was the trigger. So there's two pieces of good news that are rooted in science and research that I wanted to share with you specific to women. So the first is that women, despite the fact that there's a lot of media jokes and a lot of stereotypes around us being, flighty and emotional and, we make decisions completely on a whim. The truth is there was a researcher that took 32 studies that looked at how men and women thought through problems and decisions. So 32 different studies. 12 of those studies found that women were more analytical than men. So I'm sharing that point because I want you to be confident about our natural judgment and our critical thinking skills, and that we are also just as analytical. The reason why this caught my attention and I was looking for this validation is as we push our girls, not push, but really encourage our girls to be interested in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, which are heavily reliant on analytical skills, but they're also reliant on creativity too, but that hadn't gotten the mainstream message. So, the fact that those fields have been traditionally dominated by men, there's associations that aren't true about why that is, that maybe women don't have those skills. And so I'm sharing this with you for the good news to validate that we were proven in 12 of those studies to be more analytical than men. The research found that women systematically turn to the data more often, where men were more inclined to go with their gut, their hunches, or their intuitive reactions. The other 20 studies that were audited found no difference between men and women's thinking styles. I mean, my goal is not to say that this is absolute, but I like to use these findings and these insights as a North Star for you, because I do believe that sometimes we do know something in our gut, but to me what this proves is that we've done a lot of the hard work internally to support that gut reaction, so that when we say something is not right here for me right now, or something is really incredible here and I can't pass it up, that there's some history there that we've calculated unconsciously or intentionally. So that was the first piece of good news. The second I wanted to share is specifically about wake-up calls. And I was explaining about how I feel that this is, really that idea of something happens and you have this awakening. So what I did was look into epiphanies. I wanted to know if there was any studies that really broke down and talked about how people make decisions in those split seconds, and what our human reaction is. So I'm going to completely paraphrase. You can get more details when you read the book. But under the career epiphany section, I found research that was done out of the University of Ohio. I will correct myself later if I'm saying that wrong. But basically, they had looked at, in a gaming theory type situation, when players were one-on-one playing against each other, kind of a strategy game. They were looking at kind of their emotional behaviors, their facial expressions, and some other things, their eye movements, to determine, and their heart rate, all these things to see who was making quick decisions and why. Here's the takeaway. They found that when players were playing against each other, the ones that were more successful were, as they started to figure out the game, they made moves without being dependent on what their competitor was doing. So let me rewind that back. So there's some people that made their next move and it was clear that they were just waiting for the next person, and really it was a reactive strategy. Whereas there are others that were more centered and seemed like they had more confidence in their own ability to judge the situation and make those decisions. And that was where those people were more successful. So it's basically those that didn't constantly look at the other person to be the follower and let that dictate where they went next. They really trust their own decision making in their own perception and critical strategic evaluation of the game, of the next move, and that's how they made their decisions. They were more successful. So I know I went real technical up front, but I just wanted to share those two findings because they are rooted in really solid research, and I think that they set us up initially for this conversation to say, you know what, I definitely have all the ability and an access to making a really smart, strong decision here, one that I can feel really good about. All right, so let's think about navigating, should I stay or should I go? The first step that I want us to think about is identifying what that trigger was. The thing that was okay, so if we think about that, it could be something that's, externally motivated or something internally motivated. So externally motivated could be, let's say you were recruited let's say that your brand is really strong and there are other companies that are competitors to yours, or maybe just in the periphery, that want your talent. They want you on their team. Okay, so you're being pulled. That's kind of like external. It could also be what I said earlier about FOMO, that there's a lot of people making moves, and that kind of puts this question mark in your head of like, am I going fast enough? Oftentimes we compare ourselves to others on social media and even on LinkedIn, and the peers that we graduated with. What are they doing at this time in their lives? How long did it take them to get there? And unfortunately, we don't know all the details. We don't know all the other things that were going on, or led to certain opportunities, doors opening, or decisions they've made. But so those are some external things. So you want to just pinpoint like where it's coming from. If it's internal, is it that you've had a disappointment or a series of disappointments at work lately? Is it something about your title? Is it the job itself? Is it the career path that you're on, or the lack of career path? Is it something about the people around you, the boss that you're reporting to, the team that you're on, what you hear the company saying about where they're going, and whether that jives or doesn't with what you believe should be the mission or the work that you really value and why you wanted to be there? So step one, I'm just going to give you about 10 seconds, if you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, to really just think about, okay, what was the trigger that brought me to this place of deciding whether I should stay where I am or go? And again, that means in a company that you're at, looking at the door, or the decision to make any other type of move. Okay, so once you've really identified, okay, this is the thing. This is the thing that's coming up for me. I want you to put that to the side for a second. And I want you to think about something that's really important that we often don't talk about, or really have only just begun talking about in the last couple of years, which is your company culture. Culture is huge. It's the thing that really influences your day-to-day experiences. And it's the way that people are treated and they treat one another. Oftentimes, my mentor always says that culture is the rearview mirror to leadership's behavior. So that's very true. What is your leadership really like at your company? How do they reward people and recognize people? And how is that shaping what the company at large thinks is good and the best things to do, or the right way to be, or the wrong way to be? So thinking about culture, maybe you have some other examples to compare it to. Maybe you had worked somewhere before, or maybe you can think about where you went to school, different teams, groups, associations you're a part of. So culture is absolutely an important step. And what I want to do is help give you 3 different ways to diagnose your company culture. So the first is, I want you to dive deeper into behavior. You know how I just said that leadership behaviors largely influence the culture? So I want you to think about several situations at work that you believe contributed to that trigger moment. That things that just, were more pushing you out the door than keeping you in that company. So just think about behaviors, and reflect on who the people involved were. Think about how common that dynamic is. So again, that leads to culture, how often it's replicated. So I want you to think about, what people's interests are. And we're totally guessing here. This is just one of those things where we aren't mind readers, but it can also challenge us from, our initial assumption when we're doing this all in a vacuum, is just stop and say, okay, let me think about that one specific situation where decisions were being made, and I wasn't very comfortable with the environment or the outcome. Who was in the room, and what would their interests have been for those behaviors? And I give you these 3 terms to think about. I want you to think about in that specific situation, and the majority of your experiences with groups at your company, do you believe that people are coming from a place of authenticity? Are they coming from a place of compassion? As in, people can be stressed and things can be happening in people's personal lives. We don't know about it, and they react differently than the norm at work. But for the most part, do you feel like people at your workplace are compassionate to one another? Human to human, they really care about you. The third is fair intentions. This is a tricky one. So after culture, we're going to dive into people. But as you think about the culture, and we're talking about people that are in this group dynamic, do you feel like when decisions are made, when conversations, escalate, and maybe there's, some kind of hopefully constructive conflict, or even not, do people have fair intentions? Is it about the business? Do you feel that they can back it up, and that, this is really truly like how they feel? They have good intentions. They think the things they're advocating for are the right things to do. Or if we're talking about how they treat other people, was it, again, like something that they're completely unconscious of, but you believe that they have good intentions? So I don't know the answers to all of that. This is just one of those things to get you thinking. And I should have said this up front, but I always believe you should have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you when you're seeking to learn something or talk about a really important subject. So even if you want to pause the webinar, if you're watching it recorded later, take some time, think about the culture and people's behaviors to dive a little bit deeper in there and use those three qualities as well: authenticity, compassion, and fair intentions. Okay, second step in diagnosing your company culture is to explore how people win. So when I say win, I mean, let's think about how people actually get recognition at your company, how they ultimately garner support and people to back up their ideas and their decisions. Think about any potential patterns that you've observed that were rewarded at your company. There have been interviews where I've spoken to women that were in a sales and marketing part of the organization, and they talk about how there'd be these regular leadership meetings at the senior director and above level, around sales and marketing, maybe monthly or fairly often, or they'd be going through the top priorities, what was happening. And they would talk about all these different nuances that everybody knew about. If this person acts like this, then everybody has to follow this lead, or don't ever do this in the meeting, or you should always come prepared. If you're going to say something contrary, to say at least two things and cite two people that are behind you. I'm telling you, I've heard the racket on this. So for you, think about how people win. So think about any situation where people are trying to get support or they're looking for recognition, and think if you see any patterns there. So here's the big question. If you can identify some of those patterns, are those patterns supportive or damaging to women? This is now I take the right turn and start talking really clearly about gender bias. This is what I'm writing about. This is what I'm talking about. The fact that our systems, our culture, people's behaviors, whether intentional, deliberate, or completely unconscious, there's things that derail us and place a ton of barriers and stereotypes against us. So that's why if you can identify some of these patterns about how you get support and recognition, you might see things that are like as clear as, okay, well, there's only male decision makers. So of course that's not going to be the most supportive. They've never seen a woman go through this pathway where they don't have a female's voice or perspective, or they all have a very similar personality in who they reward, who they mentor. So just think about how people win at your company, and are the patterns that you can find and identify supportive or damaging to women. Okay, third step in diagnosing your company culture is to determine how decisions are made. So I want you to think back and look closely about where, when, and how decisions are made, and look for those trends. How do people actually get work done? Is there anything that is similar about meetings or cycles in your business, or when you know that there's been, a right turn from, or, a veering off of a strategy or a goal or a plan, what had to happen for that to be feasible? So just really thinking about how decisions are made, how people get work done, how do they use meeting time and spaces. So many women complain to me about this toxic meeting, back-to-back meeting culture where you don't have any time to think, you don't have any time to reflect, you don't have any time to do like even one-on-ones or meet with people spontaneously, because it's like the 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock meeting, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock meeting. You're always late for the next thing. You're always feeling terrible that you're making an excuse when you walk in, or some people that take on the ego and arrogance of like, I'll get there when I get there. Everybody knows meetings run over. I'm not like that. From Pennsylvania. So when the meeting should end, the meeting should end, except for today, starting a little bit late for technical issues. But I think it's really important that you think about that dynamic and think about time, space, all these things. All of these pieces are part of the puzzle that ultimately makes up your culture. The two hardest aspects of diagnosing your company culture really are that second point that I talked about how people win and how people make decisions, because you really have to dissect different groups and retrace your experiences and your journey to really think about that. Here's why this is a really worthwhile effort. You're not going to have your answer about what to do at the end of it, and this may bring up some things that are even more frustrating than you were talking about before. Most likely it's going to give you some aha moments because you gave yourself the time, permission, and space to really start to think like a game of chess about your entire workplace dynamic, its culture. And if you do choose to stay and to disrupt it and to transform it and be a real positive culture for the values that you believe in and what I believe benefit women, then you just started to build your battle plan and expose the weaknesses and expose the opportunities. Okay, so the second piece I want to talk about is people. And then I'm going to move on to referring to some questions in the book because we're actually hard to believe. We've got about 10 minutes left. So from a people perspective, the number one reason why people leave their jobs is ding, 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 their boss. That's the number one reason. It's not usually because of pay or the company itself or their job responsibilities. It's that person that's sort of the dictator of all. That's their one-to-one. They feel like all of their goals are built in this one person's basket. So on one side, this should reinforce how important it is if you are a leader or a manager that you're really thinking about your relationship with your team members and prioritizing that. But for you, so from people perspective, the first person to really think about and reflect on is your boss. What's that dynamic like? How well do they know you and what you want? How well do you know them and what they want and what they need? Have you really figured out their hot buttons? Have you figured out the things that like calm them down and make them feel like really appreciate you and help them just day to day run their job? So that's number one, is really just thinking about your boss. Second person, you can see I whiteboarded back here. It's probably hard to read though. The second is, do you have mentors or sponsors? I have a whole chapter in Dig Your Heels In about relationships because they're so crucial inside, outside of work, everywhere. Mentors are those relationships with people that can give you really good advice. Usually can have a more informal relationship with them. It gets a bit more formal and vague when you think about the sponsorship role, because women are under-sponsored and over-mentored. So a sponsor is somebody that you have at your company in a very senior level position. They've got to have power and influence over pay, advancement, all those things. Do you have these people? Do you have these people on your side, these mentors, sponsors? And before you think that my advice is have you talk to them, how often are you around them, and do you know what's on their mind? Do you know if they're staying or if they're contemplating decisions to go? So I have found that as taboo as you think it would be for a senior leader to really expose what's important to them or any decisions they're making to their protege or their mentee, it happens often. And it might even not be forthright, but you can start to see it, or you can make some assumptions, about what you know about their career trajectory. So anyway, I want you to really think about the people, your mentors and sponsors, about maybe what keeps them around. And if you don't know those things, that might be a good place to start that conversation, is just saying, I was looking back and realizing you've been here for quite some time, and it helps me to know why you stay and what you felt has really allowed you to thrive, if you believe you are. Okay, the next group of people to think about are your teammates. What's your relationship like with your teammates? How often do you get to spend time together in work projects or in non-work situations? What's that dynamic like? And how does that feed into your day-to-day engagement? Are you truly a team and allies to the end? Or is there some friction? Is there any competition? So we're not solving for this right now. We're just kind of thinking through these things and jotting them down. The fourth group that I wanted you to think about specifically was allies. So these are other colleagues or peers throughout your organization that aren't, specifically on your team, but do you have those? Do you have other people that you can talk to, that you have trust in, that you believe have seen you in, some professional situations and maybe some personal ones too, that they're just a really good sounding board. Okay, so you've got all those people to kind of think about what that dynamic is, how it feeds into your day-to-day, and if anything comes up for you, that there might be some warning signs in any of those areas. Okay. Before I move into the final 5 minutes of really helping set you up for what to do next, is I want you to go back and think about before you walked in the door at your company. What was your big dream? What was your big goals? Remember, like when you had the butterflies, you were so excited that you were getting to the next round of interviews, or whatever the process was, you got the job. There had to have been a moment that felt really good about going to that company. I want you to try to sit, and not right now, but I want you to give yourself a good 10 minutes at some point in time to imagine that moment and try to reflect on and remember, what were you most excited about? What did you think was going to happen for you? What timeline did you make up in your mind, or, were led to believe would be the opportunity for you? So really going back and thinking about that, that'll start to give you some clues to why right now you're juggling a decision, whether you should stay or you should go. It may also just rejuvenate you and remind you, wow, actually I am doing pretty well. And I had things come up for me I hadn't even imagined for myself. So I think that's important. Take 10 minutes. That's a homework assignment after this webinar, to really think about that exciting moment when you're excited to walk in the door. What was it about it? What did you think your potential and the opportunity was? Right now, I want you to go to page 35 of the book, since all of you pre-ordered. That's why you got the invitation to be on this. And if you watch it at a later time, hopefully you also have the book and have it in front of you. So what I did was I put together a number of reflection questions. Everything from trying to help you map back your managers, how many you had, what was your relationship, what were they like, because of the point I made earlier that a manager sometimes is the number one reason why people walk out the door. So you need to think about if it's just one person in your way right now, but for the most part, things have really been supportive and you felt really good. So there's a group of questions that I ask you on page 35 to think about as it relates to your management. The second group is about how you've advanced in title and responsibility. So this is about just really thinking through the pattern of your experience at this company. If you were on track to get title promotions, yes or no, and what types of responsibilities have you taken on, and what did you think was missing? Like, what was happening there? So this is really an opportunity to think about growth and development and how you had defined it for yourself, and if this is living up to those examples or not. And this is where I go back to the bias. Have you ever observed a difference in you because of your gender and what you had access to? The third group of questions is about kind of holistically thinking about your company, in your situation right now, your pay, any equity you have in the company, additional benefits overall. There are literally a dozen women that come to mind whenever I think about women that decided to jump ship, go to a competitor, and certainly got more money and a bigger title in doing so. But their regret was the evaluation comprehensively about how much they actually walked away from, and that they didn't really do that calculation to think about it. And I don't want these to be, chains on you or, shackles to force you to stay. But I think you have to holistically understand everything that is on the table. So that's that group of questions. You can think about that. The next, the following questions, they follow basically what I'm talking about. They're trying to get a sense of your day-to-day, your feelings. What does a good day look like? What was involved in that day? Going back to that people question, who do you have that you trust? Have you talked to them? What would they say? What's their situation? And then this is important. I want you to think about your business itself and what you think it should be embarking on and doing, whatever its products or service or responsibilities are. What I believe is missing in the world of work is when we don't have women at all levels of leadership, we don't have our perspective on the table in driving all those business decisions. That's why oftentimes you hear these stories about how men were making personal care products for women. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Or for the longest time, bras or our garments, our undergarments were made by men and not women. Not saying that there aren't talented men that could be a part of all those things, but when there's absolutely no women and none of our input, and we're the ones that are supposed to be the direct consumer of it, doesn't make sense. There's story after story, case after case of this. That's why I want you to think about your own business and really evaluate as you look at the representation of women across your company. If you think that there are things that your company should be embarking on and they're not, is it because you also have that lack of representation, voice, seat at the table? And I want you to think about it larger industry, because maybe there's something about your industry that still excites you, or that maybe isn't really giving you the good vibes or the energy that it had been when you decided to start, embark on advancing your career in it. So these questions don't happen quickly. You can, I think you can read through all of them, and you can chunk out pieces of time to take each section so that you don't overwhelm yourself. But I would certainly do it, whether you're writing in the book itself, but with a journal companion. And this is not a process that will lead you down to, like, number 9 means you should stay, number 10 means you should leave. Like, this is not one of those sum up your responses and this the decision right away. But I promise you, having done this with many, many people, that it's going to spark some ideas in you, some aha moments that you hadn't really thought of or considered. It'll help you determine your worth. It'll help you determine what you really want. And pulling all those things together, I think it'll put some time on your side in making that decision, figuring out what needs to be in place. Because if, at the end of the day, you put all this together and say, you know what? I can remember the reason I was here, and I still do love what we could be doing as a company, and we're not doing it. And I do think I'm the person that knows how to get it done. I've mapped out how people make decisions here, how people are rewarded and recognized. Those are all the levers I need to pull. Have I tried to pull those before? Who else can I bring on my team with this vision? What allies can I recruit? What's my relationship with my boss? Maybe it's not even that bad, but I haven't really recruited them into this bigger idea that I have about what our company could be. So at your lunch hour, taking this webinar, I'm sure this is a lot of information to put on your mind, but I have found that going back to the challenge of, more often we make these decisions in a vacuum, or we feel the time pressure to just get it done or do something, rip the Band-Aid off. But you deserve to give yourself the space, the time, and the reflection to really think about all these different factors and help that inform your decision. And I am here to help guide you, give you feedback, and bounce those ideas off as well. That's the community that we are trying to build with Courage to Stay. So I will send a follow-up note so that you know where to find the information in the book that I mentioned today. And I'd love your feedback. I'd love your stories. I'd love to hear what's worked for you or what you're still struggling with and how I can help. So thank you so much for your support in buying Dig Your Heels In. It's always really very much appreciated if you can give a review on Amazon as well, even if you didn't get your book there. And let me know how this is helping you accelerate towards everything that you want and you deserve, both professionally and personally. Thanks for joining me today.